headlines gets even more concerning. But we wanted to start with your latest article, Meet the IDF-linked cybersecurity group, quote-unquote, protecting U.S. hospitals pro bono. And I think people know that nobody at this level really does anything for free. And to quote that article, you write, anonymous volunteers from an opaque group founded by a former commander of Israel's Unit 8200 have been granted access to some of the most critical private and public networks in the U.S.'s healthcare and pharmaceutical sectors with the help of a U.S. federal agency now run by a former Microsoft executive. And what a way to start. We're already getting a few big hits on the conspiratorial bingo cards out there. But tell us about this COVID-19 Cyber Threat Intelligence League. What should people know?
Right. So the CTI League was allegedly, anyway, set up by these 4 self-described cybersecurity professionals earlier this year as the coronavirus pandemic started to really explode in terms of governments reacting to it around March or so. And they claim to be doing this because of the uptick in cyber attacks that have been observed on hospitals and healthcare system infrastructure as the pandemic has unfolded. Even when these events are reported on, a big part of that is also the fact that there have been a lot of budget cuts to hospitals, both before and during the current coronavirus crisis, that have led a lot of IT staffers to been laid off. The other side of that, of course, being that HHS, the Department of Health and Human Services, has really used the pandemic to consolidate control over how patient data is handled in U.S. hospitals, clinics, and healthcare facilities, basically consolidating control over patient data by HHS itself or a series of contractors, the main one of which is very secretive and has only really existed since the September 11th era, since 2001, and has been contracting with HHS ever since. Basically, these cybersecurity professionals were claiming to fulfill this void left by the lack of, IT staffers protecting them. They offered their services for free, and they are now directly partnered with the U.S. government as well as U.S. law enforcement agencies. Their main partner in the U.S. government is a relatively new agency overseen by DHS called CISA, which is currently headed by a guy named Chris Krebs, who used to be Microsoft's vice president for cybersecurity before he was chosen to fill that role. And it's very interesting that half of the 4 founding members of the CTI League are also Microsoft cybersecurity researchers and workers that run its security research center.
Yeah, this is so interesting because I think people have heard whispers of cyber attacks this year with so much going on. It's hard to even get down to that level, but I don't think people have heard the extent of what's going on. You write, over the past several months, 80% of healthcare institutions in the U.S. have reported being targeted by some sort of cyber attack, ranging from minor to severe, with an uptick in phishing attempts and spam specifically. Most of these attempts have been aimed at illegally acquiring troves of patient data, ding, ding, ding.
Right.
Including the recent hacks of hospitals in Chicago and Utah. About 20% of the hacks and cyber attacks reported by hospitals and medical facilities since March directly affected the facility's capacity to function optimally, with a much smaller percentage of those including ransomware attacks. I mean, this sounds like a big problem, but there are reasons to believe that these are sort of false flag attacks being blamed on foreign nations, right?
Yeah, well, I certainly think that's possible. One reason I didn't really mention in the article is the fact that all this focus on patient data, not just by the federal government, like I mentioned, by HHS, it's also been a huge focus of Silicon Valley, which is currently in this huge, I guess you could call it, Cold War of sorts over artificial intelligence, trying to get as much data as possible and beat Chinese AI companies. Microsoft is at the center of that. And of course, here they are basically offering their quote unquote services for free to all these healthcare institutions, while at the same time you have the federal agency in charge of protecting critical electronic infrastructure in the United States, including the healthcare system and the voting system, all being run by a former Microsoft executive. And then on the other side of this, we also have another figure who is basically the original founder of the CTI League and its most public face, its spokesperson as well, a guy named Ohad Zadenberg, who currently works for the cybersecurity firm based in Israel called Clear Sky, but he is a former commander in Unit 8200. He started off in that unit as an analyst of Persian cyber activity, meaning Iran, right? And then later became a commander in that unit, overseeing, I think, almost 100 soldiers, all focused on Iran specifically. He claims to still focus on Iran as a strategic intelligence target, and has actually been at the center and often the sole source of accusations that have linked Iran's government to cyber attacks in the past, most recently the hack of Gilead Pharmaceuticals and its antiviral drug remdesivir, which has been recommended and used against coronavirus since this really started back in March. It's also worth pointing out, too, that Gilead has a lot of ties to the U.S. establishment, specifically the Pentagon. It used to be headed by Donald Rumsfeld. What's interesting is that the timing of this hack, which was discovered by Zadenberg and allegedly thwarted by him, is that Gilead is part of this consortium of several pharmaceutical companies, of which Gilead is one, that is also partnered with CTI Lead.
Wow. And yeah, you get into such detail about the companies that Zadenberg has worked for. I guess they always are changing their name. It's always confusing, this kind of stuff. But this long history of fraud and espionage targeting the U.S. federal government, and it's just a very concerning history. And when you fold in that history, it's like, well, what are they doing now? Probably they're not up to any good.
Right. I definitely think that's a fair conclusion to draw from what we're looking at. I mean, it's very rare that cybersecurity professionals at major high-paying companies that make like six figures a year would just suddenly be like, yeah, we're going to do this stuff for free, especially an ex-Unit 8200 member. The salaries offered to them for their private startups and things like that. I mean, this is reported on Israeli media all the time, that they are offered, astronomical figures per hour of their time. And so it's just kind of odd that they would offer all this stuff to free. And of course, they're also advertising the fact that they're focusing on healthcare institutions, but more recently, they have been seeking to help protect other critical infrastructure in the United States, like dams.
What are they trying to do? If you had to wrap your head around why he's having these salons with all these scientists, and he's having these, meetings with all these important people in the field of science. What is the goal? What do you think the end goal? If you had to speculate, and I know you don't love doing that because you're a great reporter, but if you had to speculate, what do you think he wants? Does he want to influence health policy so that it kind of promotes some of these more nefarious ideas that he has? And does he want to wrap eugenics up in like a nice bow and say, here, it's not eugenics, it's whatever, whatever you would call it. It's better life. We call it better life,
Right.
Less
so
life.
I don't know exactly what Bill Gates wants, but I do know what Jeffrey Epstein was interested in terms of his eugenics interest. And this has been reported in mainstream media. But if that's the case with like what they did to Maria Farmer and they only reported 5%, I mean, honestly, who knows? But what they did say is that he was basically interested in essentially making like a master race, and that they were looking for girls that were intelligent, and they were asking about grades. They only wanted smart kids, creative kids, talented kids. And actually, Maria Farmer's younger sister was one of these girls that was being groomed to have Epstein's children. And Ghislaine, and then after the assault, she got, Ghislaine called her and said, you ruined everything. Like your sister was going to have Epstein's baby. She was so lucky and all this stuff. Like they really think their genetics are superior. As far as what Bill Gates might be up to, I would, I don't want to speculate because I don't know what he says in private, so I can't assume, but I would really urge people to look at the history of eugenics in the United States, because in the 1920s, the eugenics movement was so powerful that the Supreme Court ruled that a mother and her young daughter had to be sterilized because they were too stupid.
Really?
And they were from like a poor, yeah. Oh, yeah. And this is not isolated. There were states that had passed eugenic laws before this. I mean, they're the billionaires of the Gilded Age were really into this. And they were like, and the lady that they said to sterilize in that Supreme Court ruling was a poor white person. They were just like, oh, you're too stupid because you're from, the Appalachian Mountains,
Right.
But they've been like that with other, it's not just white people,
Of course. No, of course not.
obviously.
Of course not. Yeah.
But that type of mentality actually ended up inspiring Hitler. But obviously, with World War II, that type of mentality went out of style. And there's a lot of people who make the convincing argument that those people that were eugenicists in the United States during that period of time maintained their views, but found a way to sort of let it slide under the public. Right.
Right.
And
what about a lot
I
of
don't
people?
want to get too controversial, but Margaret
there.
Sanger.
Go there.
Okay. Well, Margaret Sanger, who was the founder of like Planned Parenthood,
right,
a long time ago, she wrote very disturbing things about African Americans,
right,
and intentionally wanted to put Planned Parenthood centers there, where there was the highest concentration of African Americans.
Yeah,
okay?
I mean, it's a
and that's not a conspiracy. Yeah. You can read her letters.
No,
it's odd. I don't want to get into the whole issue because it's such a left and right divide, and I really try and do everything I can to transcend the left right divide because there's so much more important stuff.
And you mean the issue meaning abortion?
Bickering. Right. But I mean, if this lady was saying this stuff and saying, I want to put the center here because I don't want this particular race to I don't want their, I don't want them to have a lot of kids.
Right. Yeah.
That's messed up. And Bill Gates' father was associated with that organization. Apparently he had ties to the Rockefellers, and the Rockefeller family were from the time of the first billionaire, J.D. Rockefeller, in the Gilded Age, where they were passing all these laws. He was into that stuff, and his sons were into that stuff. Right. So I would say to people that want to sort of look at this, look at the history, because we know what those people were saying and what they were doing, because they were open about it then.
Right. And now they've
ask yourself, did this continue? They were never held accountable. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's very possible. And if you look at stuff Bill Gates has said, a couple of years ago, too many Africans.
Right. So now those views have maybe gone underground, but they're still very much, held by people. And what do you think it is? You study these people, you've written about them. Is it power? Is it control? Do they want to just control the entire world? What's the goal here? What's the end game? Is to just have a slave race of people that will do the jobs, and then have this, kind of perfected race of people that gets to enjoy the benefits of, I mean, what do you think the picture looks like?
Well, really quick, I want to go back to my last point really quick, because, you saying this had gone underground. I really believe that, because something that Maria told me is that she heard Ghislaine and all of these people she was around say the most racist things. And I mentioned earlier that they were very supremacist, but they would not go to cities where they thought there were too many African Americans. They said the most racist
First
things
of all, I want
about these people.
Yeah, I want my human traffickers to be woke and politically correct. I do. I don't sleep at night if my human traffickers are not for diversity and inclusion. But so Ghislaine Maxwell, I mean, it's just fascinating to me, man, when you look at all this stuff, how evil these people are, how powerful they are, how big the system is, how utterly impossible it seems to get any justice. Nobody seems to be able to, even when it looks like. Now, who whacked Epstein in your estimation? Mossad hit? What is it?
I honestly don't know, because, a lot of people spend a lot of time talking about his death and what happened to him. I think that attention is better spent asking, how the heck are we going to get Ghislaine Maxwell in prison? And how are we going to get Leslie Wexner in prison?
Well,
and hold them accountable.
We're probably not. Yeah, I wish we would.
I don't really know who killed Epstein. There's no camera footage. So honestly, anything could have happened.
Right.
Honestly. I mean, who really knows? I mean, the prison guards won't talk. They're being charged. I mean, they won't say anything, right? They were apparently asleep or whatever,
right.
And the camera footage was there, and then it disappeared, and who knows? So, I don't really know what happened, honestly. But there's a lot of people that definitely wanted him dead. I think that's pretty clear. And he was middle management. He probably wasn't worth saving. If they killed Robert Maxwell,
they're going to kill Jeffrey.
They'd probably kill him too. He outlived his usefulness. You know what I mean?
Coronavirus, man-made, natural. What do you think?
Well, I have no idea what it is. And I think everyone that's saying they know what it is, I don't think they're telling the truth, because it's really hard to know. There's so much information out there. Yeah. It's hard. But what I do think is inaccurate And we're seeing this huge, very similar to the weapons of mass destruction.
Yeah, let's go to war with China tomorrow. Yeah, let's go to war with China tomorrow. Yeah.
But what's disturbing is that a lot of the evidence these people are citing, saying it's a Chinese bioweapon, for example, they cite studies. And if you actually look at those studies and you look at the funding, it was funded by not just the Chinese government, but a lot of U.S. government organizations. And that lab in Wuhan had direct ties to Fort Detrick.
Right, in Maryland.
And these other U.S. research organizations. Even these people that are claiming that it's an exclusive Chinese bioweapon, they shared all these articles today saying Facebook's fact checker worked at the Wuhan lab. It's an American.
Right.
And they're acting like people aren't going to get it, I mean, so obviously there's why would they leave that out,
What do you think?
Do
you think these shutdowns continue? Do you think we ever get our rights back? Do you think that they're going to keep finding ways to take more and more rights under the guise of
now
public health?
They will be.
It was terrorism for many years. Now it'll be public health.
Yeah, well, it's another invisible enemy, isn't it? I mean, there were the terrorists after 9/11, and now we're allied. The U.S. government is allied with Al Qaeda in Syria and Yemen, basically fighting on their behalf.
That's amazing.
And we gave up all these rights for that, and now we're openly supporting them. I mean, it's insane.
Yeah.
But in terms of coronavirus, some of the reporting I've done in recent weeks has really shown that a lot of the solutions for coronavirus that we're being told we need to, these systems, these surveillance systems we have to implement, these were planned out last year, months ago.
Yeah.
For example, this coronavirus surveillance system, they were promoting this under a different name called Safe Home, under this agency they wanted to make called HARPA. It was Ivanka Trump promoting that. Now Jared Kushner is promoting this thing today in his new task force or whatever. But last year they were saying it needed to be done to stop mass shootings.
And what
they are doing
is
they are taking these solutions that they want to implement, and they're just tacking on whatever Americans are most afraid of.
What is this?
It was
surveillance?
mass shootings.
Yeah.
Now it's coronavirus.
What is this surveillance system, though? What are they trying to do? What are they going to try to do?
Well, they're basically trying to get Americans' private medical records in a giant database mixed with everything that's on your consumer smartphone, and use it to make sure you're not social distancing and all this stuff. But it's definitely more than that, and I'll tell you why. Because last October, Bill Barr, the Attorney General, created a pre-crime program that started this year. It's called DEEP, the Disruption and Early Engagement Program. He created it last year, saying that this was supposed to be to stop mass shootings. And it's pre-crime. Because the idea behind it is that you arrest someone who's mobilizing towards violence. And the way you do it is by looking at their health records and what they say on social media, and that you arrest them before they can strike. Right. That's pre-crime. And that is a slippery slope. And after coronavirus and all these lockdowns happens, Bill Barr's Department of Justice asked for the right to indefinitely detain Americans without trial. He hasn't gotten them yet, but he might. And to think that this whole surveillance dragnet, they're not going to be pushing through, it's crazy. I have another report coming out next week about this little known U.S. government body called the National Security Commission on Artificial Intelligence. It's chaired by Eric Schmidt, formerly the head of Alphabet, Google's parent company, and is full of all these CIA guys, Pentagon guys. And basically what they say in this document that just came out last year that no one's reporting on, which is insane, they basically say in order for the U.S. as for national security purposes, we have to maintain a technological advantage over China in artificial intelligence. And the way to do that is to remake American society so that we adopt a Chinese style surveillance state, but worse than what China has.
Wow.
That's basically what they say.
And
this is scandalous.
Where is this coming out of again?
I'll send it to you. It came out as a Freedom of Information Act request. Just a couple days ago. No one's covered it. And it is just the most scandalous document. And it's insane.
And they're saying,
and it totally is the opposite of the rhetoric we are hearing about, the social credit score and, China's abusing human rights. They are literally saying we have to do that here, or we will not be able to set international norms and not be able to control the market of the fourth industrial revolution that AI is going to create and all this stuff. And they're basically saying we have to eliminate individual car ownership. We have to eliminate cash and credit cards. You can't even see they call all of these things legacy systems. You know, that's basically the American way of life. No more in-person shopping. You have to do it all online.
And this is so fucking nuts, because this is
nuts.
What I was talking about and these are people that are saying in order to beat China, we have to become China.
Yeah, that's what they're saying. They're saying China is going to leapfrog us and go miles ahead in adoption of these technologies unless we do what they're doing and we do it faster. And we have to leapfrog them, basically.
And
they're basically using this pandemic to do that, to remake society. They're doing this controlled demolition of the economy, and they're not going to reopen it up until they remake everything, I think.
Wow.
Based on the stuff that they've been saying.
This is very disturbing. So they want to get rid of a lot of these legacy systems.
That's what they call it.
Yeah.
Like going to a store in person and buying stuff, legacy system.
Wow.
Yeah. Owning your own car, legacy system.
Wow.
Using cash or a credit card, legacy system.
So now what are you going to use?
They want it to be all smartphone-based payments like they do in India now, because India, like a year or two ago, like eliminated almost all currency in circulation, and no one there has credit cards. So they all had to adopt this like mobile wallet, like digital wallet, which is really similar to the stuff they put out in that coronavirus relief bill, the digital dollar and all this stuff that they were like sort of putting in there.
Yeah, what was in that relief bill? What was in that bill? What are they doing? What are they building in there? What are they doing in that bill?
Well, I haven't read it all. It's apparently like several.
It'll be an honor to share a unmarked grave with you.
And so many listeners will be familiar with kind of the broad strokes of the Jeffrey Epstein case. He's a powerful either billionaire or multimillionaire, we don't know, but he has heavy political and business connections. He receives an extremely lenient plea for just countless counts of child molestation, rape, trafficking, and then the plea just happens to immunize, quote, any potential co-conspirators, unquote. And then there's been a big effort to kind of shine light on what happened here recently, both through the press and through civil suits. And so I think within the next 5 to 10 years, either a bunch of new information comes out that proves, Pizzagate is real, or this case totally disappears and gets buried forever, which also proves Pizzagate is real. So, it's just something to watch, but it is kind of horrifying to just do research about.
Well, yeah, looking into this guy, it got to the point where I would not be surprised if he ordered Stanley Kubrick murdered. Making Eyes Wide Shut. That's every single thing, that I find out, every new thing I find out about this guy just gets weirder and weirder. Mm-hmm. It's and I already knew he was like a serial rapist, but then each new detail, it gets more insane.
Right, and so, Virginia Roberts is one of the identified people, but there's also Jane Does that have made these sworn affidavits saying essentially Epstein trafficked them out to businessmen, politicians, other powerful people. He asked them to, gather information on these people. Police, when they raided his home in Palm Beach, found, hidden cameras, hidden recording devices. So it's
some
not
that they installed themselves.
Yes, it's not hard to stretch the imagination to say, and Epstein in fact told Virginia Roberts that he was doing this quote because he wanted to have something over these people. It's not hard to imagine that there's maybe videotape of people who just don't want that out there.
Mm-hmm. Makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
The other thing that they found when they searched his house was one of the girls' high school report cards.
Right, yes.
So that's nice that he keeps those things.
Report cards?
Yeah.
What an odd victory piece.
Yeah. Well, he likes to keep track on them, make sure that they're doing good.
Yeah. He really he offers to help them get into NYU.
Really?
Yeah.
Your grades have really fallen since you started coming to give me massages.
You're not going to get into the Corinth Institute with this ed.
Is anything going on with your personal life?
You should talk to the guidance counselor.
But yeah, so this is a federal non-prosecution agreement. We'll circle back to it.
Actually, one thing real quick is that one interesting thing is part of this all fell apart because of a guidance counselor.
Really?
Yeah. There's this girl, Mary, where she started having trouble at school, and then she talked to a guidance counselor, and they found hundreds of dollars in her wallet, and eventually that led them to Epstein and his Palm Beach.
They found money in her wallet? What?
Yeah,
it fell out of her hand and money through.
I don't know the details of why they were going through her wallet, but it was, yeah.
Huh.
And it's just something where, so yeah, like, you know, there are these other women who are like allegedly sex slaves. One of them is alleged that Epstein himself said that he like bought this woman from her parents, I think in Estonia or somewhere in Eastern Europe when she was 14. But these, like, you know, young adult women who were in the house with him who would lead these girls upstairs, and you know, it's all horrible. But essentially, you know, there were those co-conspirators who were immunized as part of this federal non-prosecution agreement. But again, according to the Miami Herald long piece, quote, any potential co-conspirators were also immunized as part of this federal thing. And then, of course, you have, as many people are aware, Bill Clinton is on the flight logs, having taken 26 trips on this Lolita Express.
Carpooling. It's nothing crazy. They're just hanging out, you know?
This plane, including to, you know, Jeffrey Epstein's little St. James Island. Apparently, on some of these trips, he ditched his Secret Service detail for some of them, which it doesn't prove anything. But
Lolita Express was, by the way, a name given to it by the locals in, I believe, the Bahamas.
The U.S. Virgin Islands.
U.S. Virgin Islands.
Mm-hmm.
I guess presumably because they saw so many young women coming out of this plane, that became a nickname amongst the locals.
The fact that he painted it yellow and black, I think, was a little on the nose.
And so there was like, we did for research for this, actually, James Patterson is, you know, speaking of billionaires, the second richest author in the world. He's almost more of a brand at this point. You know, he just kind of throws his name on things that he co-authors with people, according to like one linguist. Like the majority of his books are not actually written by him. They're written by his co-authors. But James Patterson, he holds the Guinness record for #1 New York Times bestsellers. Again, second richest author after J.K. Rowling. But the important thing is he wrote this book, or John Connolly and Tim Malloy wrote this book.
I think he wrote the first chapter because it's fucking awful.
Yes.
And then the rest of it sounds like it like comes across as written by real journalists.
Right.
But the first one, it reads like whoever was writing it was like, here's the story of a child rapist and the details of how he got caught, but I should sex it up. And so it's got these awful phrases, like he describes like the victim's apple round butt.
Oh no.
And it just
don't get horny when you're describing sex crimes. Yeah. I think that's just literary rule number 1.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Apple round? That's the words that they use?
Apple round butt cheeks.
That's boots weird. With the fur.
Yeah. The song came out right before he started writing.
He also describes a victim when Epstein walks in shirtless as being ripped like the jocks at her school.
But so this book, it gives kind of an overview of the case, but it is just kind of curious because some people might be aware James Patterson, who again writes this book on Jeffrey Epstein, would go on to co-write the book The President is Missing with Bill Clinton. And also, incidentally, he co-wrote a children's book, quote, Give Please a Chance with Bill O'Reilly in 2016.
Give Please a Chance?
Yes.
That's terrible.
But it is interesting. The book, just kind of like the James Patterson book, Filthy Rich, it kind of brushes over Bill Clinton. He's mentioned briefly. Like there's kind of like one sentence, which is, I mean, there's a couple, but one of them is Bill Clinton, Kevin Spacey, and Chris Tucker all flew to Africa on Jeffrey Epstein's plane with Jeffrey Epstein. And that's just left there as a sentence with no follow-up.
Damn. That is the one flight I would like to get the recording.
What did they talk about, those three?
He was dressed up like fifth. I'm taking that as an admission of egg-shaped dick.
Yeah.
I like how the SVU based on this was worse. Not nearly as interesting.
Yeah, there's definitely an SVU, and in the audiobook from the James Patterson thing, you can hear the guy who's reading it trying to decide whether he wants to do an Ice-T impression.
Man, egg-shaped. I don't think there's anything else worse than you can call someone else's dick.
It's deformed, and apparently he can't get a full erection.
They call the penises egg-shaped.
This is one of them egg-shaped dicks.
Like a traffic cone that blew a gasket in a factory.
I didn't know Mike Tyson was on SVU.
Yeah, I don't watch any SVU. I can't.
Yeah, but so and basically, like, I mean, and to just kind of like finish the background here. Essentially, we're wondering about. Nobody really knows how Epstein got his money. But essentially, this guy is Stephen Hoffenberg. He has this, you know.
Well, here's a description from the book.
What did he tell you he does for a living? What he specifically told me when I asked him the first time was, "Oh, I'm a brain scientist." And I said, "What the fuck is a brain scientist?" I was like, "That's not a real job. Tell me the truth." But anyway, his explanation was, "It's my job to know how people's brains work." And I said, "Whatever the fuck that means, whatever."
That's from the audiobook?
That's from the audiobook. Wow. Yeah, that's just like the type of thing that he would tell his victims. Is I'm a brain scientist. I just know how people work.
He's a brain chef.
He's a brain genius.
He's a brain genius. Mm-hmm. I mean, that's kind of also why I think that he made a lot of his money from
swindling
extortion.
People, yeah.
I mean, also, I think he's just kind of like the Pizzagate pimp. Is he? I mean, a lot of his financial dealings get murkier after Bear Stearns,
right?
And I think, but that's also around the time when he clearly really starts branching out on his pedophilia, and also pimping out children to powerful people. Like he will explicitly tell women, and this has come from the deposition, to come back to him and explain what the people that what these guys would want, what they liked to do in bed, all these kinds of things. Like he would want all the details of that, and he would keep like meticulous lists of names, and he would brag that he has connections with powerful people. And other people who knew him said he didn't know shit about investing, that he would hire people to do it. And so my guess is that a lot of the money he made was basically he would get a lot of powerful people on the line for, or just basically get a lot of blackmail material.
Yeah, he'd learn
the line for, or just basically get a lot of blackmail material.
Yeah, he'd learn how people like to fuck, and then tell them that, hey, I'll tell people that this is how you like to fuck unless you give me money.
Or not even money, tips.
Yeah,
give me stuff that I can do insider trading with.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, and that's like something we've talked about is essentially like the business model of a lot of Wall Street or whatever else is just leveraging connections to government and powerful people, which of